It started as an ordinary short trip from Nashville to Austin for a work conference. I'd taken this route countless times before, but something about that day felt different. The airport buzzed with the usual energy of rushing travelers, announcements echoing over the PA system, and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Little did I know, this flight would be the beginning of an experience I'd never forget. I arrived at the gate early, as always, and found a quiet corner to wait. I liked to people watch while killing time, and this morning was no exception. A man caught my eye. He was sitting a few rows away, fiddling with a well-worn book. His presence was unassuming at first, a plain gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. But the more I watched, the more I noticed his peculiar behavior. He kept glancing up, scanning the crowd in a way that felt deliberate. His movements were subtle, yet there was something unsettling about them. I shrugged it off as paranoia. Airports attract all kinds of characters, after all. When they called for boarding, I stood up, collected my bag, and made my way to the line. That's when I saw him again, now only a few people behind me. I didn't think much of it at the time. Coincidences happen, and we were all heading to the same destination. I settled into my seat, a window spot near the back of the plane. As the cabin filled, I couldn't help but notice the man walking down the aisle. My stomach dropped when he stopped at the row directly behind me and sat down. The flight attendants went through their safety demonstration, and soon we were in the air. I tried to focus on my book, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, I'd catch the man leaning slightly forward, as if he were trying to see what I was doing. It was subtle, but enough to make me uneasy. When the flight landed in Austin, I quickly grabbed my things and headed for the exit. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't ignore the relief I felt when I didn't see him in the terminal. My conference was a whirlwind of meetings and networking, and by the time it was over, I'd almost forgotten about the man on the plane. The return trip was scheduled for late afternoon. I arrived at the airport with plenty of time to spare, grabbed a coffee, and found a seat near my gate. As I scrolled through my phone, a chill ran down my spine. Across the waiting area, sitting casually with a cup of coffee, was the same man. Panic set in. What were the odds that he'd be on the same flight back? My mind raced with possibilities. Was it just a coincidence, or was something more sinister at play? I debated switching flights, but the next available one wouldn't leave until the following day. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head and boarded the plane. This time, I deliberately chose a seat near the middle of the cabin. As passengers shuffled in, I kept a close eye on the aisle. Sure enough, the man appeared, walking steadily toward my row. My heart pounded as he sat down just 2 rows behind me. He'd changed his hoodie for a button-down shirt, but there was no mistaking him. Throughout the flight, I couldn't focus on anything. Every movement behind me felt amplified. At one point, I got up to use the restroom, and when I returned, he was standing in the aisle, pretending to stretch. Our eyes met briefly, and his expression sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't anger or malice, it was curiosity, a calculated interest that felt invasive. When we landed, I made a point to stay behind, letting other passengers disembark first. I watched as the man walked away, blending into the crowd. I breathed a sigh of relief and headed to the baggage claim. As I waited for my suitcase, I scanned the area, half expecting to see him again. But he was gone. I grabbed my bag and headed to the parking garage, eager to put the whole experience behind me. The lot was dimly lit, the kind of place where every shadow feels like a threat. As I approached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there he was. "Hey," he said, his voice calm but unnervingly direct. "We keep running into each other." My heart raced. "Yeah, funny coincidence," I replied, trying to mask my fear. "You seem interesting," he continued, stepping closer. "What brings you to Austin?" I stammered a vague answer, fumbling with my keys. He smiled, a thin, almost predatory smile, and said, "Well, maybe we'll see each other again." I didn't respond. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove off as quickly as I could. My hands were shaking, and my mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Why was he following me? Was it all in my head, or was I in real danger? Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At home, I kept my curtains closed and double-checked the locks on my doors. At work, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him. Nights were the worst. Every creak and shadow in my apartment felt like a threat. One evening, I decided to search his face online, using descriptions and details I'd memorized. To my shock, I found a news article about a man matching his appearance. He was wanted for stalking and harassment in multiple states. The article detailed how he'd followed several people across cities, using flights and public spaces to blend in. Panic consumed me. I reported everything to the local police, providing them with the flight information and descriptions. They took my report seriously and assured me they'd look into it. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the sense of dread began to fade. I didn't see him again, but the experience left a scar. Even now, I am hyper-aware of my surroundings, especially in airports and crowded spaces. The memory of his smile, his calculated movements, and the way he seemed to appear wherever I went lingers in the back of my mind. I'll never know what his true intentions were, but I am grateful I trusted my instincts and stayed vigilant. Sometimes, I wonder how many others he's followed, how many stories like mine exist. And every time I step onto a plane, I can't help but glance around, scanning the faces of strangers, hoping I never see him again.